So yeah, welcome. Like Larry said, I'm originally from Pennsylvania, born and raised, and I worked on a campaign in 2020 for Susan Wild, who was a congressional representative, um, running for reelection during the Biden campaign as well. And so, one of the things that we worked a lot on, for those of you that are probably familiar with Pennsylvania, you may be aware that it is very politically similar to Arizona. You've got very big red rural spaces with tight blue pockets. You have to turn out a lot of independent voters and a lot of Republican voters to vote for your Democratic candidates. And so, in 2020, a lot of the work that I did and the research that I've done in the past couple years is on voter persuasion and how to have effective conversations with everyone you speak to, and not just with independents. This work is also really helpful for Democrats who may be despondent and don't want to vote or may not understand the power of their vote. So this persuasion workshop works on multiple levels, both personal, professional, and voluntarily. And so we want to make sure that we're using this in every conversation we have. So really quickly, why persuasion is important. In 2020, over 700,000 non-Democratic voters voted for Mark Kelly and other Dems at every level of government. And with that, that just goes to show how important the independent vote is. A lot of you already know we're about in thirds here, with a third of Arizona voters being Democrats, a third Republican, and a third independent. And recent polling back in June and July showed that a large majority of independents, over a third of independents, were still completely undecided on who they're voting for, which may seem shocking, but it is very true. And so we need to make sure that we're having these conversations with voters. And as LD18 is organizing, and I'll get into those details a little bit later, there will be multiple canvases coming up that will be focusing on independent voters, and Mission is doing the same thing, and we're coordinating very strongly on that. But this is our most important effort that we can do as we get out the vote. We only have 7 more weekends until mail-in ballots get mailed out on October 12th. And as many of us may know, over 70% of Arizonans are registered to the early voting list. So the vast majority of voters will be voting that second weekend in October. So again, November 8th may seem very far away, but we really only have a few more weekends left of action, and that encompasses that LD18 canvas. And so we need to make sure we're having as many productive conversations as possible. So how do we talk to undecided voters? Again, I want to remind everyone that, as Democrats, it can be very enraging to see the Republicans' rhetoric and the work that they're doing to undo so much progress that we've made over the past few decades. But a lot of these independents are humans. They just want to be heard. And our job is to give them that information about their Democratic candidates as effectively as we possibly can. And so we want to make sure that we're working together to elect representation that isn't the extremist people that we see on the ballot. So really quickly, this is a little bit of research. I know there's a lot of information on this slide, but for anyone that's a data nerd like myself, it's helpful to see. So these tactics that we're using are called values-based persuasion. And it was first introduced by Marshall Gans, a scholar who works specifically on persuasive conversations with those that may not listen to you or believe you. So these tactics have been used with great success. And a very notable example was Barack Obama's 2012 campaign. Obviously, he was reelected, and they did a lot of work talking to independent voters and even Republican voters about what Obama was going to do for them in his second term. And these tactics get at a deeper value rather than just a policy platform you see on the news and in the media. The values is what really drives our emotions, and I'll talk about that in a future slide. But by using these tactics, we're able to have more constructive conversations compared to alternative tactics. For a lot of us who have ever volunteered before or have even had a conversation with maybe a family member, excuse me, or a neighbor who doesn't necessarily agree with Democrats or agree with you, our instinct is to throw facts at people, regurgitate policy platforms, and usually that may result in getting hung up on or having the door shut on us if they're an independent or a Republican voter, and we may not gain any traction. So this tactic is used to get your foot in the door, to have more time to produce information for these voters. Sorry. So studies have proven that utilizing values in conversation is much more effective to those involved, and specifically in political campaigns. I have cited researchers here. And again, I've done a lot of research on this in my undergrad and in the campaign I worked in 2020. So there's a lot of backing for this and a lot of examples across the country where this is being used. So just to dive into this a little bit more on like a basic level, again, when I'm talking about values, what we mean here is that our values ultimately drive our emotions, which drive action. And what I say here is like, you may think of like a policy platform like reproductive rights, for example. Like as Democrats, we support a woman's choice for bodily autonomy generally. And so what we're looking at there is not necessarily like you want to dig at the deeper value. And what goes along with reproductive rights is the value of privacy and bodily autonomy, right? And so with privacy, like I as a woman very much so value my bodily privacy, bodily autonomy, and that's a value. And that ultimately drives my emotion. So when Roe v. Wade was overturned by the Dobbs decision, I felt frustrated, I felt angry, I felt sad, I felt like very just overall disappointed in the system that I was living within, which ultimately drove me to take action. That drove me to organize here with Mission for Arizona, to volunteer with a campaign, to get involved, take action, share posts on Instagram, whatever your form of action is, that emotion drives it. And so that's what we're getting at here is that instead of just focusing on the policy position, we want to focus on a person's values and what they care about to ultimately inspire them and have them feel like they are informed to drive their action of voting for Democrats specifically. So I'm going to go into a little bit more detail of how do we do that. So again, really quickly, to give some more examples of this, issues need to turn into values for you. So when you think of an issue, your instinct should be to think of the value that may underlie that. And it's not always easy. Some are easier than others. Reproductive rights and privacy like go hand in hand. That's super easy to kind of dig out. But you'll see here, healthcare, reproductive rights, economy, education, housing, those are all policy platforms that you'll hear on the news and on commercials and ads and on literature over and over and over again. But if you see here some values I've listed, such as trust, honesty, community, safety, again, privacy, family, all those different things are values that underlie the issues that we talk about. And so that's the basis of what we're doing today. So before I dig into the tactic that we're going to use, one of the most important things that this tactic uses is the personal story. And what the personal story is it's a way to offer credibility and a little bit of vulnerability to a voter. So again, one of the things that we find is that when we're talking to a voter, they don't often have a reason to listen to us. Again, if you're talking to an independent or Republican, they've heard it a million times. Like they've seen the ads, they've heard from Democrats. So if we go to them and say, like, if they think that Democrats want to take our guns away, for example, if we tell them like, no, they don't, like, that's not their policy platform, they won't really hear us or listen to us because again, why should they trust us? Like we're an outsider. We aren't like family or friends. We're a canvasser or a phone banker or a PC trying to connect with them and it's not working. So the personal story is a way to share a little bit of you and why you care, so that it offers that credibility for that voter. So a personal story is a reason that we've decided to dedicate our time and ourselves to this work. Again, you're all here as part of LD18 for a reason. If every single person joined LD18 in Tucson, that would be amazing. But again, there's a reason that you took that extra step to be part of a community larger than yourself. And your personal story is your why. So why you were inspired and motivated to get involved in the first place. And this can be applicable for different things. So again, it can be applicable for why you got involved in politics or in volunteering. It can be why you moved to Tucson. It can be why you care about your personal autonomy or personal privacy or many different values and issues that are in politics today. Your personal story connects to that. So this is where we're connecting the values with how you relate to those values. So creating your personal story has to be very specific. So again, moments tell a story. Your personal story is not a novel. Okay, I'll say it again. Your personal story is not a novel. It should not go on for 30 minutes. Again, we have very short amounts of time with each voter that we talk to. So you want to make sure that your personal story is a minute or less. And I know that sounds crazy, but it gets easier to tell a personal story. And you really want to make sure that it's very, very specific and clear and concise. So some questions to build your moment and build your story. You want to be very, 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 again, specific. Where were you? Why were you there? What was happening? Who were you with? What were you feeling? What do you want them to remember about this story? And this is where I like to share my personal story. Again, I'll do it in a minute or less. And my personal story is why I got involved in politics. And so in 2016, in November, being in Pennsylvania, I was still in high school. I couldn't vote yet, but it was like a very, very cold, rainy November. November is very cold and rainy in Pennsylvania. And on that fateful day, like on election day, I was like, there's no way Trump's going to win. Clinton's got this in the bag. Trump is out there. No one will ever vote for him. We have the majority to win. I woke up the next morning and saw the news, and I broke down. I was devastated because I knew what Trump being elected meant. I knew that meant that I was losing my bodily autonomy. I was potentially losing my right to an abortion and access to abortions. I was potentially losing my right to vote if certain people were elected. Separation of church and state was another major issue that I cared about at the time. Like all of these things were crumbling in front of me. And I went to school and saw people in MAGA hats and American flag boxers, like trumping around, like being really excited. And I went to my guidance counselor's office and just cried for like 10 minutes about how devastating this all was. And again, I was a pretty melodramatic 16-year-old, but again, I digress. So that was a huge moment for me. And I decided like, I'm not going to step back and just let this happen to me again. So as soon as I turned 18, I registered to vote. The day I turned 18, I started getting involved in politics with volunteering with my local organizations. In 2020, again, I took an internship with my local representative because I really cared about down ballot races, and we won by a field margin. And in 2022, I moved to Arizona and took this job to help get the vote out here because the state is so critical and is facing so many challenges this election cycle. So again, that was a very like 1 minute. I brought you there, right? It's like you felt the weather, you felt like my emotions, and I told you why I'm here, and I told you what brought me here. So that is something that I want you all to do. So again, it's just some really quick pro tips. Don't be abstract. So notice how I didn't say like, oh, I'm going to tell you about how I got to admission for Arizona, and it's a really crazy story because like I couldn't even vote when this happened, and like notice how I told the story, not about the story, right? You want to be very specific, vivid, and clear. You want to be very, very, very like one moment. You want to pick a moment. You want to be ready. So therapy versus vulnerability. So again, only share what you want to share. You are not required to share more, like bits of your personal story that are a bit more personal. Again, like a great example is reproductive rights. A lot of us have a lot of feelings about reproductive justice, especially as women. There's a lot of things that I wouldn't necessarily share about my thoughts with that with a voter. And oversharing with a voter has also been proven to have a negative effect. So you want to share just the right amount of things that you feel comfortable sharing. So don't feel obligated to overshare your personal story if you don't feel comfortable. Don't tell your whole life. Again, notice how I picked a very, very specific point in 2016, and then I built up to 2022 in like a very brief way. You don't want to tell your whole life. You just want to pick a choice point. Again, being short, the moment versus the story. I told you about a very specific day in my life, and then the following 6 years in like pretty quick succession. It's a moment, not a story. And then center yourself. Again, there's a lot of players here, especially in politics. There's Biden, Trump, Obama, local representatives like Priya, Nancy, Kirsten Engel, like all these people are in like very, very important, but they're not you. You want to center the story around yourself. And that is the most important thing because again, you are the one that needs to be gaining credibility with the voters. So really quickly, what we're going to do is we're going to take 2 minutes to write out a time that you felt seen, heard, and part of a community. And the reason I picked this prompt is because it's kind of, sometimes it's a little bit harder for people to like understand like why they got involved politically maybe, or like what brought them here. So whenever you join a community, whether we're starting a new job, moving to a new neighborhood, joining LD18 is a great example. It is political, but it's a part of a community. Just a time that you felt part of a community, and you want to be specific. So keeping in mind who, what, where, when, what do you want us to know about it? It should be less than a minute that you share it for. So we're going to take 2 minutes and we are going to share out. So I'm going to give you guys 2 minutes. Just you can write bullet points. You can write like the whole thing, whatever you want to do. But after that, we're going to share it with the group. I'm going to go back a slide so that you guys know not to do the pitfalls. So again, tell us about a time you felt seen, heard, and part of a community. Okay, take about 1 more minute. I promise this gets easier, by the way, in case anyone's panicking. It gets easier to do this. Okay, take about 20 more seconds. Okay, so we're going to share out. So I'm going to ask for volunteers. Remember, it should be less than a minute, and I will keep an eye on the clock. But share your story about a time that you felt part of a community. It doesn't have to be political. Would anyone like to share their personal story? Yeah, Maria Hidalgo. Go ahead and unmute for us and share.
It was 1978. My husband had just been transferred to Merced, California, a little small town in the middle of California, agribusiness. The community was about 52% Latino, and I was a high school teacher. And I would hear from the parents how they were very concerned that their children weren't getting the kind of support, the kind of materials that they needed. And I said, well, go to your school board. Well, the school board doesn't listen. Well, it turned out the school board was all white. And I said, well, elect a person. Well, how do we do that? And with Esteban, my husband, and a group of Latino teachers, we wrote a grant. We got money from the Southwest Voter Registration Project out of Tejas, Texas. With $2,000, we put up a little storefront and we found a candidate, Joe Lara. I will always remember Joe Lara, science teacher at a middle school in Merced. We campaigned, we divided everything up, and we were strangers in the community. But it was our optimism that allowed us that entree into the community. And Joe Lara got elected as the first Latino school board member. And I saw the look in the parents' eyes. I saw the sense of community that the parents in particular felt in the students. And from that moment on, I understood that they understood that just because they were not white, and they would tell me this, I was puzzled by this because that had been my experience. But in their doing this, bit by bit, cutting up the little turfs, we got Joe Lara elected. It really, I felt seen because I was new to the community. They felt heard, and I felt heard along with them. And it built a real sense. If you go back to that school district, there will always be a Chicano Latino on that school board, is because the community understood they could do it.
That was amazing. Oh my gosh. Good work, Maria. That was great. Yeah. And I just want to point out, like, you kept it pretty short. It went a little bit over a minute, but that's okay. And I would also say too that you brought us back, like you said, like it was 1998. We had just gotten transferred. Like we felt like what you were feeling, you felt like it may not work, but you were able to be successful in the end. And it brought together a community. And to this day, it's having a lasting impact. And that's the part that like kind of ties it in a nice little bow at the end. That was great. Yeah, outstanding. So for the sake of time, we're going to move to the next part. But that was really great. And so again, just some reminders about the personal story is keeping it short, but also keeping it specific. Maria did a great job of telling us where she was, when it was, what was the problem, what was the solution, what was happening, and how she felt part of that community. So definitely a great example. Awesome. Okay. So this is the tool that we use to talk to voters across the aisle. This is what you have all been waiting for. Drum roll, please, I guess. The empathetic bridge is the tool that I use and that I train others to use on how to talk to independents, Republicans, even Democrats, anyone that needs to be persuaded. You want to use this for. So again, I just want to really quickly, does anyone have a time, and it could just be like a very brief, like, does anyone have a time when you were in a situation where the conversation didn't necessarily go the way you wanted it to, and you could have benefited from a persuasion tactic or a tool to use to have a more productive conversation with someone?
Definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you want to share out? What was the time?
Oh God. There's been lots of times.
Yeah, totally.
Oh, there were times I was too much of a pushover. And
Okay.
and then there was other times I pushed back and just kept saying no, 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 no. At the job I retired from, people were hot to find me a boyfriend from work. I didn't want to date from that workplace. I just kept saying no, 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 no. There were a few I dated from there for a few months, but it didn't work well.
Yeah,
and for the most
totally.
part, I just kept saying no, 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 no. And because of that, I'm not married to one of them now. And I'm so glad.
Great. Okay. Yeah. And I mean, that's a great example, Kathy, of like, again, like for everyone in the Zoom here, it doesn't have to be like necessarily a volunteer based or a democratically based time that you need persuasion. For me, oftentimes, like when I talk to my family, that was like a big part of like me trying to convince them to go on certain vacations, or me convincing them about like certain things, like me not having to do a certain chore. But also this also works on many different levels. Again, like Kathy reminded me of another time when like I've been a pushover at the doors. Like I've been someone who, if someone says to me like, oh, I'm not interested in voting this year, I'm not going to vote, I'm not very political, if I'm not prepared for it, it like guts me. And I'm like, oh, okay. And like I walked away, and I was like, I could have had such a productive conversation with that person, but I lost it. And I was taken aback, and I didn't have a chance to share like why it's important. So again, this can be used in many different scenarios. So what is the empathetic bridge? This is a persuasion tool that guides a constructive and persuasive conversation, and it can be used in personal conversations with peers, as well as with voters you can speak with at the doors and on the phones. So again, it's a tool that we're going to use in conversation to allow and guide a constructive and persuasive conversation going forward. This is not the whole conversation. This is a tool that we use to get you in the door. So the 4 aspects of the empathetic bridge, as Marshall Gans theorized, are these 4 pieces. You have acknowledgement, which is acknowledging the person that you're talking to, telling them that you hear them, telling them that you understand where they're coming from. The second is empathy. So expressing empathy and sharing. This is considered like the moment of me, or the moment of you, which is sharing that your personal story, like saying that you've been there, you also share those thoughts. The third is hope. So this is the moment of us, which is saying like tying in the person that we're talking about, or 2, making sure that we're making it clear that like this is beyond just us two. There's hope out there. And then finally, the choice. And the choice is really important because it puts the ball in their court to make an informed decision based on what you had just shared with them. So I'm going to go through an example really quickly, and then we're going to have some more practice. So our example is you are speaking to a voter who says, Democrats support restricting gun access. I don't want to lose my guns. I want to be able to protect my property. In less colloquial terms, or in less, I guess, like professional terms, you may hear Democrats want to take my guns away, right? We hear that all the time. So we are going to walk through this example step by step, and I'm going to show you each of the steps and how we go through it. So our first step is acknowledging the difference. Again, you want to say that you hear them. So underneath the issue of like gun reform, gun violence, gun restriction is really about like safety, protecting your family, your private property. Like it's really about safety and protection. So I say, I hear that you really care about safety and protecting your family. Again, that's identifying the underlying value and acknowledging that you hear that from them. The second step is expressing empathy, and this is where you include your personal story. So here I say, I also care about my family's safety. In high school, my family experienced a home invasion, and we were fortunately able to protect ourselves. That is true. Notice how I didn't overshare. I didn't like write out the whole entire story of the home invasion, because again, that's pretty personal and it was a pretty big part of my life, but I feel comfortable sharing that it happened, right? So I include that to say like, I've been there. I've also felt unsafe in certain times. And so to be able to protect ourselves is a major thing, and it really matters. So again, expressing empathy, and this is where you include your personal story. Step 3 is finding the hope. So again, this is the moment of us. This is where we tie in the Democrats that we're talking about, the candidates that we're talking about. So I write here, I know that Mark and the other Democratic candidates are in favor of making sure guns do not get into the wrong hands while still allowing citizens to own firearms safely. Mark Kelly personally owns firearms and has seen gun violence impact his family in serious ways. And I use Mark Kelly here specifically, like I know like Mission for Arizona, Mark Kelly. And Mission really does care about candidates at every level of government. But Mark is a really great example because he is actually served in the military. He's an ex-Navy combat vet. And he also is the husband of Gabby Gifford. So he's also seen when guns get into the wrong hands, how terrible gun violence is. He is a fantastic example of a candidate who wants to protect our gun rights as those on the right may want them, while also making sure that we have gun violence measures in place to protect our citizens. So that's why I include here, like, this is the part where you can express like the talking point, the information that the voter may not have, and saying that Democratic candidates are in favor of making sure they don't get into the wrong hands while still allowing you to own them. That's a huge part of this. So that's step 3, that's finding the hope. Step 4 is when you offer the choice. Again, this is really important because we're putting the ball in their court. So we say here, do you also want a senator and representatives who will protect our rights and our citizens? Again, it doesn't have to be super detailed. It doesn't have to be very lengthy. You can just say, can we count on you to vote for a senator who will protect our rights and our citizens, or candidates who will make sure to allow you to keep your guns while making sure we're protected from those who should not have them? It can be very simple. And that's when it opens the door to a further conversation. So really quickly, just to kind of go through this, how did we acknowledge a difference? So again, by saying, I hear you, or I understand, or I'm hearing that you care about this, it's much, much, much more different than, yeah, I get it, or things are tough, but don't feel so bad, because it's sharing that you hear them. Like at the end of the day, most people just want to be heard. Like they have issues that they care about too. And so by bridging that gap and saying like, I'm hearing you, like this is what I'm hearing, it really helps. Why do we use our shared experiences? Again, it gives you credibility to say like for me, when I shared that like I had experienced a home invasion, like that voter is out thinking, wow, okay, so they do care about safety. They have had that experience, versus me just saying I also care about safety and then moving on to the next step. It gives you that credibility and it allows you to share with them. So the hope is different than just saying everything will be okay if you vote for Democrats, because we want to specify why. Like, why should they vote for Democrats? Why should they vote for these candidates? You want to be very, very specific about why they should. So again, with gun safety, Democrats don't want to just take away your guns. They want to make sure that you have safe access to guns through the safe channels, while also protecting our citizens from those who should not have them. Finally, what's the choice? We're always offering that choice of, can we count on you to vote for Democrats? Do you want a senator like this, or do you want a state senator or state representative like this? These are the questions that we want to ask. If there is any slide that you take a picture of, this is it. The 4 steps in review. This is the way that I could remember it the easiest. It's the easiest way to remember it. The 4 steps are: I hear you, me too, Democrats change that, join us. I'll say it again. I hear you, me too, Democrats change that, join us. And what this does is, again, the question isn't always going to be Democrats change that, because maybe they didn't change it, but it's saying that Democrats are doing something about that. They aren't just sitting back. They care about that issue too. And here's how. So we're going to get into an example, but some quick pro tips. Keep your personal story short. Again, the example personal story was shorter than the one that I shared with you guys about why I got involved. And you can vary the length, but it should never be more than a minute maximum for that step. This one's a big one. Don't use but, however, or any other phrases that undermine your bridge. So if I build this great bridge and I say, listen, I hear you. I hear that you care about safety and protecting your family. I experienced a home invasion in high school and it really affected my family. And I was really fortunate to be able to protect myself. But Democrats don't want to take away your guns. That's wrong. You just undermine everything you just said, right? That's, now they're going to think okay, well, yes, they do. I've heard it on the news. Blake Masters just told me that Democrats want to take away my guns. So why should I even listen to you? We want to share this information in a way that makes the voter feel they're heard, and that we're sharing information with them in a positive way. So we want to make sure to not use but or however, and rather just build on with information, continue to build the bridge. Finally, don't skip steps.
Let's wait for a moment because Anna Smith's screen has frozen up, and I'm sure she'll be back momentarily.
There is. Oh,
You froze
hi
up
everyone. There. Awesome. Sorry. I think I saw some people freeze. So I think the last one was don't skip steps, that you may not have heard me say. Just briefly, we don't want to skip steps because it undermines your bridge even further. And every step is really, really important to making sure that the voter feels heard and that you're able to share the information effectively. So we're going to have a practice one. So this first one says, and this one is very common, I've heard it many times. You have a voter who says, since 2020, it seems like nothing has been done. My one vote doesn't matter, and I'm not going to bother. We've all heard this before, especially from my generation. I feel like my generation is very despondent when it comes to voting. And so this is a very common experience that you may have at the doors. And this is also where Democrats feel this way too. There are Democratic voters out there who believe that their vote doesn't matter, or even if it does, they haven't seen any progress. So why would they even bother? So again, the 4 steps are: I hear you, me too, Democrats change that, join us, take a minute. So at 7:08, I'll give you till 7:08. Write out the bridge, write out the 4 steps. And I'm going to have a couple volunteers share out after that. So write out the 4 steps in the way that you would talk to this voter, and then we'll come back. Okay, take about 15 more seconds. I assure you it will not be perfect the first time. It is okay. Okay.
To volunteer to share your story, click on the reactions button down at the bottom. It's got a little smiley face on it, and you'll see there's a choice to raise hand. So go ahead and do that and tell us your story.
Yeah. So if we have a volunteer, and I just really quickly before someone goes, act like we're the voter. So don't say, oh, well, I would say this. Just tell it to us as if we're the voter saying, since 2020, nothing's been done. My vote doesn't matter, so I'm not going to bother. You can also, if you can't find the reaction button, you can unmute and I will see you and call on you.
Somebody told me today they don't vote, and I asked her, is there anything you care about? And oh, she just walked away.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I
And
couldn't persuade her.
that's okay. Yeah. And that's a great point is that this happens kind of after you figure out what issues they care about. But there is a way to do this in which, like, they may not share what issue they care about. Again, it's okay if it's not perfect. I did see some people writing stuff down. So even if you just want to share like a couple steps, doesn't have to be perfect.
Hey, Mary Helen, maybe you could tell your story. Oh, here we go. Catherine Lynn. Go ahead, Catherine. Go ahead and unmute so we can all hear you. There we go.
I hear your frustration that officials can be ineffective and have trouble passing things in Congress. What issue in your life interests you the most? That might affect whether or not you would vote. And they could name something like gun control or women's right to choose or, one of those. And then I could say, well, I'm familiar with the different candidates that are running. And one of those people is Kirsten Engel. She cares about, let's say they say the environment. She's an environmental lawyer here in town, and this is what she's worked on in the legislature.
Yeah, absolutely.
Something like that.
Yeah, that was great, Catherine. Yeah, and I just want to point out you did a great job of acknowledging them, saying I hear your frustration because again, that's what it is. It's frustration. You also shared like I totally like I like the asking like you offering the choice of like what do you care about kind of like what issues do matter to you. And then you offered that like you offered the hope of saying if for example if it's environmental issues, Kirsten Engel is a great example of a candidate who's going to fight for those things. And that's someone that can really help push those issues forward. So again, that was great. The only thing that I would add is definitely sharing a bit of personal story in there is always helpful because I think that we've all been in a position where maybe we felt like what is happening, like why isn't anything working? Like maybe my vote doesn't matter, or maybe it's something that has been a bit difficult lately. So that's the only addition I would add, but you did a really great job with the steps that you included. That was really, really solid.
Okay.
Amazing.
There's one question I have. Okay. On these different, like what I would is if I was canvassing or even on the phone, I'll be doing it on the phone because I don't drive. I would like a little printout on the various major issues of these different candidates so that I can say something personal about them. Like, for instance, like Gutierrez, who's surprisingly won hers. I know she's a teacher. She teaches at Tucson High. She, and I asked her, have you worked with any budgets and stuff like that? But I had a personal conversation with her. So there's specific things I can say, but there are some things that the fact she is a teacher isn't going to help with with some of the other issues. I would rather just pick an area that I know they're strong in, like Kirsten and environment, or her in education, or which, but then I get these people that'll say, well, it's this damn immigrants. They're the ones bringing the virus. And, somebody needs to stop those criminals and drug smugglers that are coming into Tucson or whatever. And they believe that, they want the wall.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Or
and I think
that,
yeah.
well, I need to come back for a major issue like immigration. I can't say, oh, you pick the 4 or 5 issues and you pick one for each talk, because you only have 5 minutes. Then if I had a printout and a little synopsis of these different people, like for instance, like Chris, I voted for him because he already had some prior political experience. But if you pin me down and say, could I really say something specific about him? I don't know.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely, Catherine. And I know that I personally meet with like Linda Horowitz and LD18 a lot, and so she's working on creating a printout with those details of the local candidates. And Mission for Arizona is working on producing a 1-pager of the major issues for Mark Kelly, obviously, but Katie Hobbs, Adrian Fontes, for people that aren't super familiar with their platforms. And that's definitely something that I can have one of the LD18 folks follow up with you.
Well, and not only that, but we can one-to-one go over our personal story and tie loose ends up so that we can say it in a minute. Maybe there's 2 or 3 other things that are more effective. Like, for instance, I was a Social Security employee when the Oklahoma City bombing occurred, and how I had to step in for Oklahoma City when their building got destroyed. And that really affected my view of, well, government is really important, it had a really strong impact on me. Or the fact that I worked for Catholic Charities when September 11 occurred, and or I worked on a campaign and somebody said my vote really counts, or told me that every
Yeah,
vote,
absolutely.
or the fact that, or whatever. We need to pick maybe 2 different ones so we don't get too bored, but maybe help with, ironing out the kinks so that we're not going and or whatever.
Catherine,
Yeah.
if you check the chat, I've sent out a link to the LD18 website where we have all of the candidates and links where you can click onto their website, so they're all collected together.
Yeah, and Catherine, to follow up with that, Larry is actually holding a secondary workshop following this one with practice on how to build your personal story, how to have these conversations. So there will be more time after this. But for the sake of the time for this workshop, I'm going to move to the next example. But really quickly, Catherine brought up a really, really strong point of even if you don't know the issue that someone cares about, you can talk about your personal experience and your trust in government. Like Catherine said about the Oklahoma City bombing and how that really opened her eyes to government and how important it is. But even further, I can share a little, like an example for this example. So one way I would approach this is saying, I absolutely hear you. In the past, I felt like my vote maybe doesn't matter as much either. It's definitely a shared frustration, especially with what just happened with Roe v. Wade being overturned by the Dobbs decision. I found for a moment that I felt like we're spiraling backwards and there's nothing I can do about it. Voting holds such an important power, and it may not have an immediate effect that you can see, but by electing local representatives to hold those offices and protect our reproductive rights, we can protect them on a local level, even if they're taken away at a federal level. Can I count on you to vote for Democratic candidates that will support our needs and make sure that your vote counts this year? And again, that's very brief, but that's something that makes it a little bit more concise, and you can pick your own issue, or you can focus on, like, I felt that way in the past myself. We really need these votes. So you want to make sure to, even if they don't have a specific issue in mind, you can share your personal story as well. So very briefly, I'm going to go over what happens when you skip steps. So if you just, again, it's the same scenario since 2020, it seems like nothing's been done. If you do the first one, this first grouping where it says acknowledge a statement and establish empathetic connection. So you say, I absolutely hear you. I too have felt frustrated in the past when it felt like my vote didn't matter. In 2016, Trump being elected felt like everything I had worked towards was just for naught, and it felt like my vote didn't matter at all. And then you end it there. That's not very helpful, right? That's like kind of like commiserating in our shared misery and not offering anything to follow up with that, right? So that's where skipping those hope and choice steps are really, really critical, because the whole point of us talking to them is to offer them the choice of the Democrats. In the second option, where it says acknowledge the statement and offer the choice, this just kind of ignores everything they said. So if you say, like, I hear your frustration with voting and that it may not matter, can we count on you to vote for Democrats this cycle to protect your rights? It just kind of skips and undermines everything that you were trying to talk to them about, right? It's like, I hear you, but it's not that bad. Like, just make sure to vote for Democrats. You want to make sure that you hear them and you share why it's important that they vote, because otherwise they have no buy-in with this option. Finally, the third and the most common, again, just to reiterate, this is what happens most often, is finding the hope and offering the choice. So they say that they don't want to vote this year, and you say, Democrats are working really hard for us to protect our rights and to make sure that we have a democracy after all of this. Can we count on you to vote for Democrats? It just completely, like, plateaus their conversation, ignores everything they just said, and you did not acknowledge them at all. And this is something that happens a lot, right? So this is like what happens when you throw facts at a person and you don't necessarily build the bridge first. So you want to make sure that you're using every step possible that we have in our toolbox. Okay, so this one is more applicable to you guys with the independent canvas coming up in LD18. So this scenario says you are out canvassing and knock on the door of an independent who says, I used to vote for Republicans, but now I don't even know who to vote for anymore. I don't really align with either party. So again, there isn't necessarily a specific issue that they mention, but you can talk about the values of, like, the Republican Party versus the Democratic Party. There's a lot of ways that you can take this. And again, just making sure to share your personal story with why this matters. So take a minute. We'll regroup at 7:23, but take a minute to write out the 4 steps as they stand for this scenario. So again, the steps are: I hear you, me too, Democrats change that, join us. Okay, take about 10 more seconds. Okay. So who thinks that they mapped this bridge for our voter who says, I used to vote for Republicans, but now I don't even know who to vote for anymore. I don't really align with either party. And you can raise your hand to volunteer, or you can just unmute and I will see you.
Yes, so you can be launching from someone's home, so that email should include the address.
Well, Anna, I can offer my take on that when, the voter says, so it'd be something like this, I hear you say that you feel like your vote doesn't count. And I know I felt that way at one point, and I just felt like I wasn't making any difference. And then one day I opened up the New York Times and saw the pictures of all the prisoners in Abu Ghraib who had been covered with bags on their heads and electric wires attached to them. And I thought, this isn't right. I really need to get involved. I really need to make a difference. Things that people are concerned about now are the lack of reproductive rights, thanks to the Supreme Court, erosion of the right to vote, and tamping down on the right to have public schools. Democrats are going to change all that. Democrats will fund public education. Democrats will expand the right to vote. And Democrats certainly won't let big government or state government come in and interfere with a woman's health care decision. So I'm hoping you'll join us. Will you be a voter?
That was great, Larry. Yeah. And so again, just to highlight some of the key points there, you used all 4 steps, which is a great start. But even further, you included your personal story and you shared, listen, this is what Democrats are doing, right? This is what you can count on Democrats to do this cycle, even if you may not align 100% with either party. This is the results that they can offer. Can we count on you to vote this year? Even just be a voter. That's a huge aspect of it. Great. Yeah, I see we have some more hands. Todd Hanson, would you like to share out and then we'll move on to the next one?
Well, I don't have an answer for 2, 3, or 4. The first thing I would say is, why did you used to vote for Republicans and why are you not sure anymore? And then I would, then I'd try and figure out the answers to 2, 3, and 4.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I doing this, it seems like it is hard to kind of pinpoint an issue. And I've also seen at the doors that a lot of people are like, I don't know, they're all important, or, oh, I don't know, I don't really like pay attention to that stuff. But if you have a specific issue you can focus on, that's really, really helpful. And I also like to tell people too, I'll add like my little 2 cents in here. My favorite way to approach these ones, especially for the Me Too portion, is to say, listen, I don't 100% align with either party either. And I don't think there are many people out there who do. Being in a 2-party system, it's hard to choose between the two. And this year, especially, we're seeing in Arizona how extreme the Republican Party is, where the Democrats are truly moderate and will work to protect your rights, as Larry said in his bridge, protecting your rights and protecting your individuality as an Arizonan. And I think that's what's really important here. And just a quick aside is that for all of us, we've seen Blake Masters, Carrie Lake, Mark Fincham, like, oh my gosh, those are really, really, really extreme candidates that most independents will not align with. Those candidates are not for Arizonans. They are not here for you. They're out to self-serve themselves as election deniers, as insurrectionists, as people that will take away your voting rights and your reproductive rights. So again, that was a great way to bridge. And Todd brought up a really great point of trying to enter in a little bit more, saying, why don't you vote for Republicans anymore? Like what changed this year? And then going into it about why Democrats are the right choice. So we debriefed that one. So the final practice, and y'all can kind of map this out with me. But I like to just, for the sake of time, I will map this for you guys. So this is a similar situation, but you're on the phone with an independent voter and they say, I used to be a Democrat, but with everything going on, we need more moderate candidates in office. I won't be voting for the LD18 candidates. Again, this is also one that's I kind of chuckle at because again, the Democrats are moderate, but you don't just want to say, well, the Democrats are moderate this year because again, why would they trust you? So I like to bridge this gap by saying, I totally hear you. There are definitely some Democrats out there that are very, very, very far left, and are maybe not holding the values that you find important. Here in Arizona, we have a lot of candidates who are actually relatively moderate when it comes to their policy platforms and are focused on Arizona first. We want to make sure, especially in the local elections, these candidates are running to protect our public schools, to protect our reproductive rights, and to make sure that voting rights are secured for Arizonans by keeping vote by mail in effect. Can we count on you to vote for Democrats at a local level this cycle? So again, there may not be a specific issue that they care about, but letting them know, listen, again, you may not align 100% with the Democratic Party. And there's a lot of folks out there that are very, very, very far left. But there are candidates here in Arizona who are moderate and are just looking out for our children with the schools, our voting rights with vote by mail, and our reproductive autonomy by making sure that that stays legal in Arizona. And so at the end of the day, just drawing it back to the importance of the local candidates and making sure people are aware that they are out there and they need to be elected. So again, what are the 4 steps of the empathetic bridge? I hear you. Me too. Democrats change that. Join us. We can use this tool pretty much anywhere and everywhere. You can use it obviously on conversations on the phones or at the doors, but you can also use it in personal conversations with friends, family, neighbors all across Arizona. And this works more than other tactics. And I've heard from a couple of different volunteers about this. When they have conversations with voters using the empathetic bridge, the voter often feels more heard. They feel validated. It isn't super aggressive either. It's taking a step back to say, I hear you. Like, I'm here to talk about that, instead of pushing policy points as we normally do. And so again, it gets at a deeper value and allows the voter to take some time to think through what we're talking about instead of having to make a snap decision. So we're going to put our new skills to work. So again, we only have 7 more weeks until voters start voting, and we need to reach them now. So taking action in September with the LD18 canvas is absolutely critical, and we need all hands on deck. So to knock on the with LD18 to speak with independents, that is going to be starting on September 9th. You can sign up at LD18dems.org, and I believe Larry is going to drop that in the chat. Yep, he just did. So you can click on that to sign up to be a canvasser with the LD18 canvas. I also included some tidbits here down below. If you are unable to canvass, Mission for Arizona is holding phone banks with all the LDs that are not canvassing currently, are not phone banking currently. So if you're interested, please let us know. But again, the Be a Voter project is going from September 9th through September 28th. Now I've gotten that date finalized. But they are going to be spreading the word about the Democratic candidates and the dangerous Republican ideologies with independent voters in your precinct. So please make sure to sign up at ld18dems.org or at the link that Larry shared in the chat. Also, you can contact Linda Horowitz, who is responsible for volunteer recruitment, at this phone number or this email address. Feel free to take a picture of this slide.